Beyond prescriptions.
7:45, morning show time. Have a guest via the phone line, and we welcome in Nick Gosnell.
Thank you very much, Rob. On the phone with us this morning is John Wilson with Kansas Action for Children. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nick.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the legislative session, and when we talked back in January at the beginning of the session, you really, I think, kind of felt like you might need to be playing more defense than offense this session. Is that how it played out?
Yeah. Yes, that is how it played out. There was a need for defense across a range of issues, tax policy and issues impacting childcare and education and health and economic security. So absolutely, quite a bit more defense.
All right. And some of that did come down to just a vote or two in the veto session. The tax policy bill that died by one vote in the state Senate, you all would say that keeping things the same was better than that change, right?
Yeah, so you're referring to Senate Bill 169, which was kind of this mega tax bill that included a little bit of everything. It would have immediately eliminated the state sales tax on groceries. It would have made some changes to the standard deduction. It would have made some property tax changes and addressed some Social Security issues. But the big component of it that we had major concerns with was that it would take Kansas to a flat tax or a single tax rate, and that change would disproportionately benefit wealthy Kansans at the expense of low-income Kansans. And so that's why we opposed it, and that's why a number of lawmakers opposed it, and why it was so close in the Senate.
And the way that all played out is something people can read elsewhere, but fundamentally, the revenue picture for the state then is going to seem, at least for the next year or so, similar to what it was previously, which gives opportunities for continued funding of you all's priorities. Another veto that ended up being sustained was one regarding child care safety standards. Can you explain, first of all, what that bill would have done, and secondly, why KAC is happy that it was sustained?
Great question. So this is House Bill 2344, and this bill came about with really great intentions. Lawmakers like us are really concerned about the child care crisis that exists in the state right now, where parents are struggling to find affordable child care, and those who provide child care are struggling to make a living. And so this was some lawmakers' attempt to try to address the situation. The challenge with it, though, Nick, is that what they wanted to do was take current health and safety standards that are in regulations, meaning they are much more flexible and can change to the shifting dynamics around the state, and put that into state law while simultaneously loosening the educational requirements to provide child care and loosening some of the other health and safety standards. So those in totality gave us real concern about the well-being of children in child care. And so you are correct. It was an issue that was debated all session long on one side of the legislature, and it eventually came down to a vote in the House to override the governor's veto of that bill, and that override attempt failed. And so we are leaving the session, thankfully, with lawmakers having a slightly better understanding of what it takes to address this child care crisis. But now we have the opportunity to do it the right way, which is engaging professionals and advocates in the business community and those who are really invested in childcare in crafting a better solution than what this bill would have offered. And that's going to happen between now and the next session.
I was going to say that's a huge component of what I believe Governor Kelly wants the goal of her early childhood transition task force to be, is that the line between child care and education, it's when you're talking about an under 5-year-old, it's all the same thing. Yeah, because you're teaching them something no matter what you're doing. So, I guess talk a little bit about the work of that group that was established in January and how they can continue that work forward to hopefully better inform lawmakers and get everybody back to the table next year to maybe craft a little better policy?
Yeah. Hey, this early childhood transitions task force that the governor put together has an all-star roster of folks who have an interest in childcare and who have decades of professional experience in child development. So their task by December is to generate recommendations for how to create a single state agency that would merge together what currently exists across 4 or 5 state agencies, so that it's better coordination of programs and services, easier way for parents to access information from the state, easier way for businesses to access information from the state, and an easier way for child care providers to access information from the state when it comes to child care. And so,
media.
Back on the BW Morning Show, Nick Gosnell, John Wilson with Kansas Action for Children. So, John, I'm going to try to ask you a bit more specific question.
Sure.
As you shape the child care and 0 to 5 policy across the state, I know you guys care about kids of all ages, but this early childhood task force is a big piece of what happens to the kids before they get to school. Here locally in Reno County, we've got a local task force that is trying for a state grant to get themselves some additional slots for childcare. It's really a supply issue here in particular. What policy would be at least something to look at with regard to that capacity issue? Because it isn't just a Hutchinson problem. That problem is statewide.
Yeah, that's a great question. My understanding is right now the state Department of Health and Environment is actually in the midst of a comprehensive regulation review that is going to look at a lot of the things that came up during this legislative session, and they're going to propose these changes. And so it could be that by this fall we'll have a whole suite of regulations that could be tweaked to address concerns that were brought up by providers during the legislative session. I think that's the first piece. Regulations obviously have to be a part of it. We need to make sure they're modernized and keep up with the profession. But the second thing we need is funding. And thankfully, there is an opportunity from the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund through their accelerator program to actually fund building child care, like building the infrastructure and building spaces. So that's a really great opportunity. But the last thing, as we know, as your listeners know, the state has a budget surplus right now, and I think it's important for the state to invest some of that surplus into child care. And what better time to do it than after this task force comes up with recommendations to strengthen the system and hopefully have a single state agency so that we have the right programs and systems and structures to then invest money into. So I think those are state-level things that will improve what's happening in Reno County and help out the already great ideas that seem to be coming up from the community.
So I guess my other thing would be that then what we'll probably need, assuming that this all happens this year as it's supposed to, is a comprehensive child care policy bill, a whole lot like what they do with K-12 every year, but basically I don't want to call it a pre-K bill, but I'm sure that's what it'll be called in Topeka when you get there. But a child care / up to kindergarten policy piece that will then have to have funding pieces in it, because that's just kind of the way the process works. There's no way to know what that might look like yet because, again, the task force isn't done with their work. But as that happens, what does KACC as the priorities that you're going to talk to the task force about as they continue to make their decisions?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that guides our work is this recognition that parents can't afford to pay more and providers can't afford to make less. And that's where the state steps up with funding, and that's where the federal government continues to play a role in funding. And what we need to do at the state level is blend and braid all of these funding sources in such a way that it can easily get to providers who are providing high quality learning experiences for children. And so it's a systemic approach. And so our expectation moving into the next legislative session and beyond is to make sure that we create this single state agency, which my understanding is the governor wants to not do that by executive order, but really get legislative buy-in and approval to do that. And once we have that agency, then it can start to look and feel like what K-12 education feels like for many parents. know that the state is making those investments, and we need to treat childcare the same way that we treat K-12 education. It is learning. It is the first experiences where children are building the necessary mindset and emotional and skills to be ready to learn in kindergarten.
All right. And speaking of K-12, at the end of the day, the stability of funding at least seems to be there for now. From a KAC perspective, what do you think about what we ended up with?
Well, it was kind of a strange session when it comes to education funding. We saw the appropriations for education come through a different bill than the budget bill, and it came along with 11 or so pieces of policy. And so we were a little frustrated by that process, but ultimately where we landed is K-12 education received its funding, including special education funding, but it isn't the enhanced amount that the governor requested, and it isn't that enhanced amount that we know school districts and families are expecting to see. So lawmakers need to come back next year ready to really do some serious work on special education funding.
John Wilson with Kansas Action for Children with us. More information on what KAC is doing at the State House and across the state at KAC.org. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Nick. Take care.
You bet. This is